All right, ready, Jay.
Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here with us today. My name is Jay, and I'm doing some community schools work out in Wayne County. And I'm also really glad to be part of the network's efforts to encourage sustainability of high quality programming. You know, the ARP dollars have really offered a lot of us a chance to do things we otherwise could not do. Then the question becomes, how do we do high quality stuff? How do we keep that going when the ARP dollars wrap up? And these conversations around cultivating partnerships are really designed to offer a pathway forward. If you look at any literature on sustainability, the idea of doing that together with other people is almost universally included. So we are really glad today to have Nathan with us and Chris with us. And Nathan and Chris are experts that are coming from two different arenas. Chris is working with an intermediary, the Rochester Area Community Foundation, to provide an after-school network and an after-school support system for practitioners across the greater Rochester area. I find myself benefiting from her work. And Nathan is in a very unique, cool municipal partnership between the school and the city. And Nathan's going to be able to tell us more about that. We do also want to take time today as we get started to find out more about who's on the call with us today. And so I'm going to launch a poll and just ask if you could complete that. And feel free also to sign in and chat. We'd be really glad to have a record of who was here. And please also continue to ask questions in chat as we go through the day. And this really is a call for you. So if this prompts a thought, if this is meeting your needs, we really want to know. And I do just want to share that I was able to have a follow-up call with a couple of people after, because our last call prompted some thoughts, but they needed further dialogue. And we're really glad to do that. I've always been thrilled with the network's ability to follow up and meet the needs of practitioners and meet the needs of the field. And just want you to know that if you're listening and you're like, gee, this was helpful, but we do hope you reach out. Allie, I just want to give you a second to talk about the network and if you've got any updates for folks from folks on the call, and we'll start with you.
Thanks, Jay, and thanks all of you for joining us today. Share a couple of slides. So as Jay mentioned, this is part of our sustainability series. I wanted to share some of the upcoming trainings. Our next training is on February 15th, Grant Writing 101, and you can see some more of the dates and topics that were based off of what was selected during our last workshop as what was important to all of you. We'll also have an opportunity for some in-person sessions at our annual conference, Schools Out, Make It Count, which is taking place in Troy, New York on March 24th and 25th. And our sustainability track is taking place, moderated by Jay, on Saturday. So we hope to see you there as well. I mentioned already, this is our next session, Grant Writing 101, reviewing the basics of grant writing, which will take place on February 15th at the same time as the session, noon to 1:30. Very briefly, the New York State Network for Youth Success is a statewide network for after-school, summer, and expanded learning opportunities. We're the state affiliate for the National After-School Association. We're one of 50 statewide after-school networks that works in partnership with the After School Alliance. We are the backbone for the New York State Community Schools Network and the state lead for the National Girls Collaborative Project, working to increase gender equity in STEAM programs. We have 15 regional networks throughout our state. You can see a map there. And our work is really to increase access to high quality programs and services. So we're excited to be able to offer this sustainability series to help create and sustain those high quality programs and partnerships. We have a lot of resources available for you, some of which you can see on the screen here. I'm not going to go through all of them, I did do that, or we did in our last session, and we do have a recording of that up on our website. But I will share a link to our full resource list in the chat so that you can access all of these that you're seeing, as well as many other resources that we have available. The one that I would like to mention, whoops, I scrolled too fast, apology, is the Child and Adult Care Food Program. We do work to increase access to nutritious meals for students. And one way of doing that is through the Child and Adult Care Food Program, which is a federally funded nutrition program where eligible programs can be reimbursed for serving healthy suppers and snacks in their programs. So the reimbursement is really helpful for many programs to be able to offer that. You can find more information at afterschoolmealsny.org, and that is also on the resource list that went into the chat. You can stay connected with us in many ways. These are in the resource list as well. Our listserv, where we'll send updates about this and many other opportunities. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter. We are a membership organization, so you can become a member. And in addition to this sustainability series, we do have another series happening right now around justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, or JEDI. Today's workshop is Cultivating Partnerships, Building Relationships for Sustaining High Quality Programs. And I will turn it back over to Jay.
Great. Thanks, Allie. I think, do we have a chance to put Chris and Nathan's bios up on the screen? Is that the next slide there? So just give you a chance to look at just the incredible expertise that both Nathan and Chris bring to this discussion. And I would just encourage you to feel free. Again, go ahead and sign in and chat, if you will, and respond to our poll, if you will, so we know who's here. We're looking at about a quarter of us are from school districts or BOCES, another 40% are from community-based agencies. And then we have some higher ed friends and government agencies and joining as well. Really appreciate the wide variety of folks we have. And I think as we get into the conversation here, just feel free, again, ask those questions right in chat, and know that we're going to get to as many of those as we can right at the end. I'm going to end the poll and share the results with folks a little bit. And then I'm going to go ahead and ask Allie, I think we can drop those bios off the screen, and we'll get underway and start to talk with our two expert panelists. Chris, I'm really looking to start out with you, and was hoping that you could tell us just a little bit about how you got started in the work of after school time, in the work of partnerships, and also if you could give us a little bit of information about your current role. Would love to hear more from you now.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for taking your time from, I know, very busy days to be with us. When we talk about the out-of-school time, I would have to start with youth development, because to me, that is the basis and the foundation. And a couple of touchstones in my own personal and professional growth were starting out as a youth worker in an alternative youth service agency, working with runaway and homeless youth. And from there, moving to heading their downtown counseling office, and finding myself advocating constantly for young people, so that I was dealing with the juvenile justice system and the social services system and the school systems for young people, in finding that the best way to address problems was to bring staffs of those systems together with our staff to work out processes, procedures, ways to work effectively together on behalf of young people, and figure out how to problem solve and troubleshoot when we were finding ourselves not always agreeing around the same page about things. From there, I ended up with almost 30 years after arguing with the county for quite a while in youth work, almost 30 years working for the Youth Bureau of our county. And the two key things in terms of partnerships that stood out for me is the very first thing I realized when I walked in and started to visit all the programs that the Youth Bureau was funding, because I was the director of allocations and program development and capacity building, was that they would say, staff would come in and set different expectations about what it was they were supposed to be doing. So the first thing that we all did was to bring our staff together with our contract, youth work contract agencies, and work together on coming up with agreements on expectations and everything from how do you maintain files to how do you track and document what you do. But it was a joint effort that they were a part of that so that they could own it and so that it would fit with their needs. And the second, I think, turning point for me was recognizing that we were a very small funder. The only way to maximize resources was to bring other funders on board. And we were having a major problem in the southwest part of the city with kids and no place to go. So I reached out. I reached out to the city. I reached out to United Way. And at that time, I reached out to the Community Foundation and said, we have a problem in this part of the county and part of the city. We would like to do something different. Youth development framed, looking at risk and protective factors, because back then, just as it seems like now, we were into the flavor of the month, be it violence prevention, teen pregnancy prevention, whatever, and put together a joint, first time ever in our community, a joint funding proposal with the city and the county and the United Way and the Community Foundation. And then I put out an RFP, worked together to select a recipient for that RFP, that put it through our respective boards or legislative processes, which they were all in shock because they had never had to deal with this before, something that was joint funded, and then funded a program together. And that was the beginning of our work with multiple funders in the community, both private foundations, our United Way, which was often a match to Youth Bureau funds in those days, and the city and the county, and establishing relationships and working together. Near the end of my career with the Youth Bureau, I also was an administrator on loan from the county, and Jay knows this well, for a Safe Schools, Healthy Students $6 million grant. It was a collaborative grant between the city school district, city of Rochester, and the county of Monroe. And as an administrator on loan, I coordinated the partnerships, the oversight, and all that occurred within that grant. So that was a 4.5 years of working together, learning many, many new things about all of our various partners. Still is always a learning curve, and realizing the importance of flexibility because people come and go through time. Upon my retirement, did some consulting work, particularly with the Community Foundation, and then became the director of the Greater Rochester After School and Summer Alliance, which had existed since 2001, and which I sat on as a funder to the group, but it didn't become a formal intermediary till 2016. And so I take my beliefs in the strength of partnerships, and you can do more when you're working together with me and everything that I do. That's it.
Well, I don't think that's, I don't think that's it. That's a lot. That's so much. And Chris, thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I hope that, what I heard in there was just really starting with that youth advocacy and that individual story, and then the program level up to the systems level, and bringing all of that experience with you through your journey. So we're going to continue to try to mine that experience as we go through the call today. And again, encourage people to chime in to chat with any questions. We may have some folks that are from youth bureaus or some folks that are working on grant projects, and you might have a particular question, and we just encourage you to go ahead and ask those at any time in the chat. Nathan, how about you? Could you also share your story with us? I mean, out of school time is a unique field, and people find their way into it in an assortment of ways, and I'd love to hear your story.
Yeah, well, first, thank you. This is such a cool and large group of diverse stakeholders. I love the mix of community-based organizations, municipal staff, some higher ed, and some schools. So really feel privileged to be here. Jay is also an amazing hype man, and maybe overselling it. I think we're all experts here, and I'm hopeful that our story might have a nugget in there, but would love to learn from you all as well at some point. And yeah, my name is Nathan Beck. I am the Madison Out of School Time Coordinator, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a bit. But I think what led me here is what I think a lot of people, and Chris, I appreciated your story. It's starting as a youth worker, and then growing from there. I think started directly working with young people, eventually managed programs, developed programs, directed programs, directed and scaled multi-site programs. I think got a little frustrated with some of the limited ways of impact in directing programs, and so wanted to go to grad school to think about, well, how can you shape conditions and make bigger impact, or different impact, sorry. And I went to grad school, and I published and got to write about out of school time and think really critically about race, particularly, and how it impacts young people's experience. And I think in grad school, we're mostly like sitting on top of a hill overlooking a lake, talking about problems and writing about problems, which was not really my jam. And so feel really privileged to be able to be back actually in the nitty gritty and very imperfect work of working with the young people and with systems to try to improve their experiences. And I've been in this position for about 5 years. So, and most Madison Out of School Time is in Wisconsin. It is an out-of-school time intermediary, and it is this really curious intermediary. And I think you asked about stories. Most is something that has a ton of origin stories. I remember when I first started, probably for the first 2 years, about every week, someone new would come up to me and say, "Hey, did you know that I started most?" And I would say, "Oh yeah, tell me more," right? So literally probably 20, 30 different people would come up to me and say, "I started it." But really, what a gift that is, and what an idea of partnership that is, that so many people see themselves so intricately connected, right? The flip side of that gift is all the people that I'm accountable to, but it's mostly just a gift. And so that's really the structure and the origin story, that a lot of people nurtured this idea that working in partnership, we are better. And it's really based on this idea that you've got to have 3 strong pillars: the city, the school district, and the people that are doing the work, right? Community-based organizations working together. We each have different assets, gifts, and abilities, and young people and families deserve that we're doing everything we can. So our system's really creative. I'm actually a joint position of the city and the school district. So I work for both of those lovely institutions. And we have a steering board of the people that actually do the work of community-based organizations. So really trying to be accountable to those three systems. And I think a key value that really undergirds our success is that we try, not always successfully, but we try to put them all on equal footing. City and schools and community-based organizations. So that's a value at the core of the way we work. We don't always live it out, but we really try to. And so this model, right, of being between all these institutions is actually a really strategic and smart way to embed and amplify partnerships to benefit OST. It embeds an ally, an organizer, an advocate for the field in large public institutions. And I can't tell you how beneficial it is to be embedded within these places. So I've worked in partnership before, right, where you're in separate organizations. And it's different to be actually accountable to an organization, be within them, know the rhythms, the systems, know the actual people that get the work done, right, versus the people that are just the face of it. And the stresses that the organizations are going on, right? So it's been really valuable. And we've also been able to really shape the agenda, the data, the way in which our city and school leaders look at things. There have been occasions where I'm coordinating a meeting between the mayor and our school superintendent. We're separate institutions in our setting. And I'm actually providing talking points to both of them, right? So, you're really an opportunity to shape the way in which they look at issues. But I think really the best way, and I'll try to be brief with this, to share about our model and its evolution, is to talk about how it enables some really high level collaboration that benefits young people. So last summer, our school district at the last minute in June had to unenroll 600 students from summer school. So that's a pretty significant number, right? You imagine 600 families that thought that their kids were going to be in summer school, all of a sudden in June getting an email saying, whoops, sorry. And here's where, without the work that we had done to build relationships and partnerships, that would have been that. An email that goes out, it causes significant harm to families. We blame something else, the national teacher shortage, right? Definitely not us, of course. And we move on because there's no solution to it, right? That's what it would have been. But because we have the infrastructure of relationships, what we were able to do is offer any of those 600 kids a spot in a network of dozens of enriching summer learning programs hosted by community-based organizations. So every kid that enrolls, the district will pay for, right? The district, even if they actually enrolled in a free program, that we said free programs aren't free to run, community-based organizations deserve this, so the district funded it. And they use surplus staff dollars, right? They had anticipated hiring a lot of staff and they didn't. And so there were dollars there. It's a precedent that I hope that we can tap into in future years. I'm not sure we'll be so lucky, but we're going to try. And so that's that. But another thing, our district is good at lots of things. They are not good at writing checks to people. They're really, really bad at it. And that's okay, right? They're a school district. They're not really meant to be a funder. They're good at other things. But again, working with so many different community-based organizations, the legal hassle of getting checks would have been massive. And so what we're able to do is we're able to have the district send one check over to the city. The city, which writes checks to people all the time, it's easy, I do it all the time, can distribute the funds, right? But that just keeps things cleaner, keeps things simple, doesn't have our providers banging their heads against the wall for 9 months trying to get a check. So, I think that's one example. Undergirding that is obviously a network of relationships and trust, our shared data infrastructure, where we're already sharing personally identifiable data of students in real time with over 100 different locations. And obviously, the tons of work that we've been doing. So it doesn't just, appear out of nowhere. It was really years to build up to the point where we could do that. So that's a little bit about us.
Again, I think you and Chris have different understandings of a little bit than some of the rest of us. That is a lot. I heard personally identifying data. I heard a shared network of providers. I heard co-located in a municipality and a school. And you started to allude to this. I want to give you a prompt just to ask for maybe one more example of an accomplishment that you think is possible because you kept going. Might not have been possible a few years ago. I heard that example of 600 students, for example. That seemed pretty tremendous. Is there something else that you're doing now that you think, gosh, we wouldn't have had the strength to do this together a few years ago, but now we're doing it?
Well, I appreciate, and I want to pause on the words "kept going," because I think that is such an unglamorous, it's not sexy way of talking about it, right? It's not strategic, but that's what it takes, right? And that's what it is. I think it's this continual imperfect movement of keep going. So I think that's helpful, right? This is not always fancy, fun, enjoyable, strategic work. Sometimes it's just that you got to continue to show up. And you got to continue to build those relationships. And those people leave, right? And you got to build new relationships. So it is this unglamorous treadmill that you got to keep going on. But yes, I think the 600 students, obviously, I think other things that we were able to do, during COVID, and again, 100% because we kept going, right? Because we had the relationships. Obviously, schools were closed in our community for a year. Obviously, that's challenging for a lot of people, but maybe I should say schools weren't closed. Teachers weren't teaching from schools. What we were able to do is have every single of our 33 elementary schools open to community-based organizations. So we opened all the schools. Buses, right, are a thing that schools can do and have the infrastructure and the systems and the funding to do so, even if they're not teaching from schools. So we had buses running. We had food service staff on site at schools. We had nursing staff on site at schools, right? A lot of these things that you traditionally wouldn't think of that are hard to do virtually, but the district already has funding for, right? We were able to leverage, we had a network of different community-based organizations supporting young people at these facilities. About 5,000 young people throughout the pandemic at these, and then several other facilities too. We had our city providing funding. We had our mayor advocating at state government along with other mayors for more funding. We got some. And so, I mean, I think that's like the quick version of it. It is something, I'll be honest, I don't want to remember much of it because as cool as it sounds, there are 5,000 young people and I'm proud of it. It was also incredibly messy, imperfect work that had a lot of problems, right? So somebody's like, cool, let's take the win and let's move on, right? Because we don't want to have to go back there ever again. But again, like we had school buses running, we had schools open, we had the mayor advocating for funds and providing funds, and we had community-based organizations that were supporting about 5,000 predominantly Black and brown young people in person all throughout COVID.
Well, it sounds like you've really worked together to create a culture that's focused on young people there, Nathan, and that's certainly to be commended. Chris, how about you? I mean, you shared about that common funder application there, and some of the other really cool accomplishments that I'm aware of in Rochester. Other folks may not know about. You said GRASA really started as a formal intermediary in 2016. What is it that what's some stuff you think you can do now that's within reach now that if you were just getting started might have been too tough to tackle? Some accomplishments from recent months here.
Well, we are an initiative of our community foundation, and the foundation began the work of out of school time back in 2001. And it really was bringing funders together and policy folks at the table to look at the quality of youth development and out of school time programs for young people. And we all worked together on that over time, looked at tools and standards that would be helpful to our organizations. But it really wasn't until 2010 and on that we really started to delve more into the whole quality work. So we spent a lot of time focusing on quality of programs to the point that the intermediary was staffed. But I think the biggest changes came as we worked through COVID. Again, the pandemic, I think, created opportunities. As much as it was a very challenging time, it created opportunities to do things very differently. And one of the things that came out of that was bringing our local funders together and saying, how can we pool resources to ensure that there is funding for summer programming so our young kids are actively engaged in safe and healthy and thriving environments. And so the first year was just, okay, we'll try this as joint funders, and everyone came together and we put out a common application through Google Forms. And the role of GRASA is not a funding role. It is a role to support our out of school time system in our community. So we acted as staff to that process, and funders were pleasantly surprised. The most surprising piece that came out of that is beyond our traditional out of school time summer providers. We learned about a lot of grassroots and neighborhood-based summer providers and faith-based summer providers that we did not know about, that could expand our network of activities that are smack in the middle of what we might consider high risk areas for young people to live in, but could provide safe places and fun programming and learning enrichment. So we did it 1 year, then we did it last year. And from last year, it was decided, a lot of their boards said, we really like this process. So some of our private foundations, such as the Farish Foundation and the SL Foundation, were examples of that. We've had Unite Away in the process, our community foundation, the Coner Foundation. So there's a number of foundations that, I've always kind of liked this. And it's a very interesting process because it's not about we don't want to fund, it's how many can we fund? How many programs can we fund? How many kids can get served? So we are on our third year of this common summer application. And the biggest win for us, because I would love your school district to talk to our school district about what is possible, because I think there's a big difference between a mindset of what is possible versus a mindset of, we can't do that. But our district, instead of issuing a separate, very convoluted, very long summer application process, agreed to join the common application. So that is a huge step forward, as well as the city is a partner. City Rec is a partner in that funders group. So GRAZA has 4 components. The After School Alliance has 4 components as an initiative. One is our staff. The other is our network, which is mostly of providers and champions. The other is our community advisory group. And the 4th component is the Out of School Time Funders Network, which is composed of county and city, as well as private foundations in the community, which are inclusive of United Way. And they meet monthly, and we staff their process. And they do not take minutes. Then this allows for people to feel comfortable. But what's most amazing is seeing funders say, we really like this program, but our criteria does not allow us to fund it. And somebody else will say, well, I like it, so I'll fund that. And somebody else will say, well, I can put this much into the program. And another funder will say, well, you know what? I can make up the other half to that. So there's a lot of give and take. There's a lot of opportunity for people to talk about their belief systems, their attitudes, their values about this type of programming, and to inform each other in ways that are positive. In looking about, our biggest factor now that we're going to be going in, the biggest change now will be looking at shared measures that we can agree to as funders, so that we're not burdening providers with extra layers. And that's extremely hard not to do because there's federal layers, there's state layers, and then of course there's local funder layers. And so the goal will be coming to consensus. We will be using the Every Hour Counts measurement framework to identify indicators from there to use. We are not, as an intermediary, this is personal, and not as an intermediate, a big push for academic standard testing scores. We think that it's not a good measure of what happens in out of school time programming. And we are working to enlarge the scope of thinking of our boards so that they have a better understanding of what measurements make sense in this work. So that's something that's being done. And then we're also just finishing up a reimagine out of school time process for our community, in which the local funders funded a process with the RAND Corporation and our local Center for Governmental Research to take a look at the state of things in our community and recommend. And the most important thing that came out of that was engagement of youth and parent voice in the work. Strong engagement to the point that parents put together the surveys and the questions for focus groups and personally went to churches or school and functions to ask other parents to give input into what they wanted to see in programming and what their concerns were and what the barriers were for them. So those are some of the things that the reimagine out of school time system process and the common application process are 2 big wins that or gains that are helping us to go more deeply. At the same time, we have not got some of the systems that Madison has. So we're learning, and we'll learn from them. And we really reach out to other intermediaries across the country to learn from each other, and to find what's working for them, what their recommendations would be. Would they go down this road again? Those are some of the things. It's not only about partnering at the local level, but at the national level.
Chris, thank you so much for all of that. And I think I just wanted to prompt one more brief thought from you. In recalling our planning call, you mentioned that maintaining partnerships is sometimes that idea of enduring partnerships is a bit of an illusion, you said. And so I think what I'd like to frame for people that are listening in is that some of these very significant accomplishments come from the maturing of and the keeping going and that treadmill that Nathan was talking about. But could you talk to me a little bit about what you mean when you say enduring partnerships is an illusion?
Well, people come and go. So that's part of it. Our school district probably has seen 5 superintendents in the past 5 or 6 years, and all new cabinets. So as Nathan said, you're constantly reestablishing relationships. Certainly what's key though in helping partnerships sustain themselves, even though people keep coming and going, is clarity of mission, things in writing, agreements, memorandums of agreements are important. Coming to agreement where there are differences, like the shared measures now that we'll take a look at. So part of it is very much building of relationships, and it's just keeping at it, that persistence that when people come and go. And in all of the quality work, we're recognizing that language is important, because our best learnings come from those closest to the work. I mean, all the people who are closest to the work, they're the experts. We have to do a better job of listening, learning, and then looking at what does that mean as we listen and learn to how we go about supporting them. So they inform, or need to be informing, our actions at the intermediary level and at the funder level. And so, and I do believe that with the pandemic reinforced what we've already known about equity. And that was the challenges around equity. And it has directly changed how we do grant making at the Community Foundation, as well as some of our other local funders. When I say we have a common application on Google, with Google Forms, it is short and simple. Remember, you're talking about 6 to 10 weeks of summer programming. We don't need a proposal that's 20 pages long. Tell us what you're doing. Tell us what will the kids have gained by going into it. I mean, and each time we've tried to improve the application process based on feedback we've gotten from those who have applied. So it's that enduring partnerships are also about continuing the learning and moving it forward, as well as having an understanding.
Well, it sounds like that static partnerships aren't possible. So you need need to be dynamic in that. And some of the dynamic nature that's required isn't necessarily stereotypical of municipalities that are probably a little more static than dynamic. But Nathan, somehow you've gotten some big municipal partners to really be better partners. And we wanted to ask you, looking back, if you were a participant on the call and you were trying to encourage better participation, better partnership from a municipality, do you have an entry point or starting place you might suggest?
I appreciate your honesty and frankness, and that is, I'll be honest, like the tension in my job, right, is working for these two large bureaucratic white supremacist organizations, right? And so that is the tension, right? And I think municipalities and school districts, the way I think of it, have like this gravity towards them. And I can understand that, right? A school has high stakes. They've got testing, they've got parents that are concerned, they've got unions, like they've got a lot of problems and a big mission. And I think, and then you layer in, layers of bureaucracy. And I think everything kind of draws back into itself, right? And so I've found it's very hard, right, for school districts and municipalities to be good partners because they've got problems. They've got a ton of shit to deal with. And I get it, right? So it's like you can understand it, like conceptually. It's like I understand why you're operating these ways. Same with municipalities, right? So there's this gravity, right, that brings everything there, right? And often in the ways in which our school districts and our municipalities think about partnering are, they go out and say, "We have this problem. Can you help us?" Which is maybe it's a step, right? Versus saying, "We're seeing this common problem, right? What are you seeing, right? What are some assets that you have? We have these assets, right?" So it's a different frame. So I think I'll just speak mainly at this point, I think, to the other municipality and school folks on the call. And I think I get it. I experience it too. But you're not the center, right? Young people and families are, right? And who often has a more grounded, connected relationship with young people and families? In our community, hands down, community-based organizations that are rooted within community, have staff that look and come from those communities, have enduring and longer-term relationships, right? Than schools and municipalities, right? So I think those are the sites that we should be learning from. They've got their own constraints, right? They've got those assets. They've got other constraints, largely funding, right? Other things like that. But so I think that's, maybe the entry point is like, let's be real. Like, cities and schools are not the center, and we can't act like that anymore. And so if you work for a city or a school district, really think about how you can disrupt that and how you can actually look at community-based organizations as, what if they're the center, right? And our mission is to support them. And so maybe that frame of mind, what assets do we have that can actually enrich the work that they're doing with young people? So I think that's maybe a start. You can also fund programs. You can fund programs more robustly. And I think a lot of people kind of pivot to this coordination at a city and school district level. Coordination's not bad. I like coordination. I do a lot of it. Coordination doesn't solve a problem of scarcity. And so often the problem is actually scarcity. And so, and we pivot back on this, let's coordinate, right? Because we don't want to name that we have massive gaps, right? So I think I just want to be mindful of that. Coordination is important, but if it's a problem of scarcity, coordination is going to help around the edges. And let's be real about that. And let's think, as schools and cities, how can we leverage our assets and our reputation and our reach to increase funding, in addition to the level of coordination.
So that idea of person-centered, that idea of putting the community-based organization at the center and really listening to what's going on there as a starting point, as a leverage point for change and responsiveness from municipalities is a great tip. And right now, you've got this joint municipality operation in Madison. And what do you think, if someone wanted to start a joint operation like that, if they wanted to say, hey, let's see if I can get my school district in my city, or let me see if I can get, in some cases, we've got town and city, county and city. If we wanted to try and get a couple municipalities together, where might you start with that?
Yeah, it depends where I sit. And so as a nonprofit, where I might start with that is building relationships with elected leaders and with city staff, right? Figuring out who are the key players, But it starts with relationships, right? You're not going to go in agenda driven and get a whole lot of success without a relationship. So I think being really mindful of who those people are, how can I connect with them? A lot of elected leaders are really accessible, right? And we don't always think of that. So invite them to events and use every opportunity you have to educate them, right? You're the experts. They're not. They might think it, but you are the experts. So use every opportunity you can to educate them about what's going on. So I think there, as a quick starting point, as a municipality, I imagine there's probably not any mayors here, right? If they are, cool, good on you for showing up, or superintendents. I bet it's a lot of people that that probably have similar issues that I have with your districts, right? Want them to be doing more, want them to be engaging differently. And I think the way that we started, our started with a halftime position between the city and the school district. Every city budget in the country can handle a halftime position, right? Every school district can. And so I think starting there, right, that was really appealing. And that's what started, was cities contributing halftime, districts contributing halftime. And then we grew from there. So I think thinking creatively about how do you actually get that. And also to you all, also, like, I think your roles are to educate elected leaders, mayors and superintendents. I think, every opportunity I have to give info and educate, I do. Our mayor doesn't really respond to like me randomly sending her a memo, right? She wouldn't pay a whole lot of attention to it. And so I think we got to get creative. So she was at an MLK youth event on Monday. We had about 120 middle schoolers. I was there with a group of 6 teens who we were working with to get feedback from the middle schoolers. Super cool project. And the mayor was going to show up at 1 to, say, I'm mayor, good job, right? Something like that. Don't send this to recording. She's great. I'm diminishing. So don't send her this recording. But what we did is I prepped the teens. I'm like, teens, you've been gathering feedback. What you're gonna do is, like, as the mayor's leaving, that's the entry point, right? You're gonna grab her and you're gonna say, hey, can we get some of your feedback too? And then you're gonna use that as an opportunity to say, we've been doing X. This is what we've been hearing, right? And reflect back. Turned into a 20-minute conversation, right? Of teens really showing their Post-it notes, right, of the feedback that they got. And so, I mean, I think it's like, be creative, right? At every opportunity you have, I'm often asked to kind of write talking points for the mayor. And those are, that's a memo that she'll pay attention to, right? That's an opportunity to educate, even if she's not going to say it all. But I also like to think that when she does take it and says it, that becomes part of like her value set, right? So I think being creative about every opportunity you have to educate elected leaders is an opportunity that you should take.
Well, I appreciate that idea of being creative, of authentic conversation and dialogue, and really in finding champions too. Chris, I was going to ask you about the role of an intermediary, and could you even just real briefly, I mean, not all of us are super familiar with even the concept of what an intermediary does. So if you could just tell us a little bit more about what you've learned in that intermediary role, especially as it pertains to maybe encouraging more school district or municipal support. But again, what is the advantage of of working with an intermediary? If we've got CBOs or we've got school districts on the call, I mean, the Network for Youth Success is as a statewide intermediary. Why should somebody seek out an intermediary?
Well, all intermediaries are different, so they all have different focuses. But I do believe that when you have someone who can champion and support what you do and bring like minds together for both problem solving and solution thinking, that it is a benefit to all. At the same time, it takes time. And we recognize that as agencies and programs are out there, it's important to be able to provide some incentives in recognition for the work that they do. So one of our big roles is to educate and advocate. I will be in Albany next week for our lobbying day, for example. At the same time, it's nice when a local funder calls me and says, hey, can you tell me a little bit more about out of school time programming and why I should fund it? So that's another example. Or a startup organization who's doing some great work with kids in terms of after school programming and looking for funding. And somebody calls me and says, what's the best way for me to approach this with them? So our role really is to advocate, inform, and educate about the value of this programming to parents, to funders, to elected officials, to the community at large. And we see our role as trying to increase both the quantity, the accessibility, the quality, and equitable opportunities for young people. We have some major institutions that provide some great programming. They're not necessarily accessible to our brown and Black children in our community on a regular basis. So it's how do we partner? How do we bring them to the table so that I don't get an afterthought call of, hey, I've got 2 slots in our program. Do you know of any city kids who want to come? I'm like, oh, and it starts on Saturday. Well, that's an afterthought. The question really should be, how do we plan to increase opportunities for X number of program in our community that we don't normally touch? And can we brainstorm about that? So those are the things that we're looking to do. We're looking to build up funding streams. We're looking to build up technical assistance, coaching, and capacity building for these programs. We're looking to come up with incentives and eliminate layers where we can. But that's all beginning. And we're a smaller intermediary. There's only 2 of us. So we're working on strengthening our infrastructure so we can do more with those do more for those in our community that are doing amazing work for young people, as well as listening to parents, because we've got some local parent input, and we also have a countywide survey of parents in terms of what they're looking for. And they do want safe, engaging places for young people in the summer and in after school. I think there's a lot of confusion between preschool and daycare programs and after school and summer programs when kids are formally in the school system. And those are the things that we're trying to create a continuum of transitions for.
But I wanted to just encourage people on the call to pause and think about that idea of an intermediary. And it's something that right now, neither Nathan nor Chris, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but neither of them are directly responsible for a program starting at 2:15. Neither of them are directly responsible for making sure that there's no allergens in the snacks or anything of that nature. They're right now able to move along and around and under and above and to the side of program to really bolster and strengthen that. And I just want to encourage you all to know, if you're like, well, geesh, where can I get help like that? Really would encourage you reaching out to the Network for Youth Success to ask about that. And they may be aware of other intermediaries in your area. But that the other key message that I'm hearing from both of these experts is just the idea of not going at this alone and the idea of it taking time. So I've got a couple more questions for you, but I know some folks may need to leave the call at 1. And I just want to pause for a second before we continue on with my additional questions and any that may come up in chat here, and just ask you to each close with a story, if you would. It could be a good story from either of you, a good success story. We've shared a couple, but maybe one more example for folks. And Nathan, if I could start with you, and then Chris will come back to you for just kind of a closing feel good, if we could.
Yeah. I think not the story I planned, maybe I'll get to it later, but I think going off of what you said and what Chris just said about, I think the power of an intermediary. I mean, Jay, you're right. I always think about it at 2:15, everybody I work with has a bunch of middle schoolers running through the door, right? And that is their focus, and that is where it should be. And that work is hard as hell, right? And so the value of having intermediaries and positions like mine are, my role is to think about the system. That's all I'm supposed to do, right? Think about the system, think about the barriers. Everybody else that I work with, they do this, right? They're creative, they're thoughtful, they're systems thinkers. And at 1 o'clock, 15 middle schoolers are going to run through the door, right? And that's where their focus needs to be. So I think that's where I'll end, is the power of an intermediary or positions like this are being able to actually think about, what is the system, what are the conditions, like what are the barriers that are common, and how do we actually address those in ways that are not gimmicky, right? In ways that are sustainable and big picture.
Cool. Chris, what do you have for us?
Well, I'm going to do first of all, I agree with everything Nathan has said. If we could redo some of our state systems, that would be great. But those are the hardest to do. And I had a mentor who's always told me change is a process, not an event. And there are many steps to that. And so it takes time. But I guess I'm going to tell you a youth development story that's relevant to us right now. Is when I was at the Youth Bureau, we had a youth leadership program and what they call Youth as Resources program. So young people were involved in grant making and giving out grants. They had a pot of money. They made decisions about peer-led, solution-oriented programming, written by youth, led by youth, done by youth, as well as then formed through the city recreation department, a youth advisory group that became the mayor's youth advisory group for a long time. And the lead youth in that was very active. He was from the city. And he continued in the community, and he went to school in the community, and then had a job in the community, and then became a board member of the school district in the community. And then became the president of the school board. And today, I always say, we used to say to him when he was 14, 15 years old and involved at the Youth Bureau, "You're going to be mayor someday." And he is our mayor. Malik Evans is our mayor today. And he grew up in this work. And that is a delight. It is wonderful, to have that kind of knowledge that, this work is important to him. So those are some of that to me is the power of youth development, when you have the kind of programming and the systems. Our work is about creating a interconnected learning system of opportunities and fun, play-based, engaging. It is not to replicate a school day. And that's what we're trying to do, is to reinvigorate that youth development framework in the universal promotion and prevention programming that is so key to our young people thriving.
Well, I want to thank you both, and we're going to continue the conversation on for a little bit longer. But I just did want to realize as we come up on that 1 o'clock hour, some folks would have to depart. So I wanted to make sure we got that highlight. That Malik Evans story is an incredible story, and really that idea of growing your own and investing in champions is something I want to circle back to at first. And this is a great time for folks to start to enter questions into chat if you have any. But one thing I did want to ask you, Nathan, is when it came up in our call over the summer, when we were discussing, you put a lot of effort into trying to keep good folks around. And you've identified what is a core reason that some folks end up leaving the work. Can you talk more about that and how you're securing the involvement of champions in your?
Yeah, I think I've talked about a lot of stuff. The most important and impactful things we do, I think, are investing directly in our youth workers. And so I think, everybody struggles with retention in the workforce. And I think we came about this in so many different ways 4 or 5 years ago, trying to figure it out. And we made things way more complicated than they needed to be. We had conversations directly with youth workers, and we found out what are the reasons that people are leaving. It is a function of compensation. It's not something fancy. It's not something gimmicky. It is compensation. And so I think, once we understood that, we really shifted our value set, and it took some time. It took a little bit. It wasn't like a overnight thing, but we shifted our value set. So once you have the data, and it's not hard to get, call a youth worker on the phone, talk to them. That's data that says compensation is a problem. Then the solution is wages. When you make that value set, right? When you have that like simple problem, compensation, solution, money, and then when you actually have that value set, it's easy to find money. It's not easy to find enough money, but it's easy to find money. And so I think we, in a ton of different ways, through a ton of different programs, get cash to youth workers. We do this directly. So we don't give it to organizations. We have direct relationship with youth workers where we're sending them stipends for a variety of different ways. Sometimes just because very, very few strings attached, if none at all. They range between, $141 was the smallest to about 5,000 is kind of some of the largest checks we've given. And so I think it's like once you shift that value set to say, actually, this problem's compensation, we can find some money. Let's find it in creative ways. We can get money to youth workers, and we do that in a ton of different ways. We evaluate it, and it dramatically increases retention, and it creates people who are really invested in the work that we do. A couple of quick just examples of ways to do it. You all probably have attended conferences, right? If you can find money to send yourself to a conference, you can find money to send a youth worker to a conference, right? That's a value set that we have always done. Every time I go to a conference, we also send a direct service staff as an opportunity. I'm generously being compensated to be here today. That's a check that's going to be able to go directly to a youth worker, right? It's once you make that switch, it's like you find money everywhere. They're not the large giant pots of money. Sometimes they're quite large, but they're not the giant ones we wish we had. But so I think that's what we do, and I encourage everybody else to really think, center that value that the people that do the work matter, and figure out ways to get the money.
So Nathan, could you give one more example, like of something that you might compensate a youth worker for doing that might be something that people consider?
So we frequently hire youth workers for small scopes of work, right? And so as a city, right, that's something that they work with consultants all the time, right? And so when we're doing work, we think of how do we actually hire youth workers to do job embedded work. So a lot of things is we've done a lot of data gathering by hiring youth workers, right, where they're within their own jobs, getting paid a good additional wages, $1,500 for 30 hours of work to gather data for us is one way. We at the cities, municipalities often have functions where at the end of the year money disappears, right? If it's not spent in budget lines. I always like to think it goes to buy bullets, right? Or something horrible, right? That we have to stop. And so, we went through one year. At the end of the year, we looked at what budget lines have flexibility and what budget lines have excess. And we sent those along with a letter from the mayor to youth workers. No questions asked as end of year bonuses. We stipend people participating in professional development. We write it into grants. When we write grants, we also ensure that we're explicitly naming and talking about that. We're doing a fellowship program right now, a paid fellowship where we're investing in leaders, right? And supporting them pay. So I think, we do it a variety of ways. But I think the thing is, like, once you make that switch, that it's like, oh, this is a problem, and you find money everywhere. Again, not lots of money, not sometimes, but little money here and there.
It sounds like you're really creating a culture of appreciation and of celebration. And Chris, I know that you are very much about celebrating the people that are doing the work. And I was just going to ask if you could share some strategies that you've had for celebrating champions and keeping some of the talent and some of the skill that we need on the front line and in program leadership at the.
No, I would like to learn a little more about what Nathan is doing. We are actually right now putting together a proposal that will include some pots of money to be able to pay for youth work staff to go to conferences, or because a lot of them are part-time, the training that they go to is outside of the direct service time. And so being able to pay them for their time for training, for example. One of the things we did do is we did get some COVID funds from the county, and we were able to put out an open call for programs, some of our partners, to say, if you have program resource needs, materials, curriculum, tablets, microscopes, STEM programming that you want, give us your list. One program asked for sewing machines because they wanted to do a sewing program with kids. And we were able to buy $20,000 worth of materials and distribute to programs who put a request in. So those are some of the things that we look for to do. That was supporting programs directly. We do need to do a better job of figuring out how to bolster pay or to support people in the job. So those are the things that we're working on right now. We have done incentives to participate in quality work. We've paid programs and staff to participate or to enter data into systems. So those are some of the things that we have done in the past.
Yeah, and I really appreciate your perspective there, Chris, and that idea of quality, because that's something that you have put a lot of time into. And of course, a lot of quality comes from having trained staff, having equipped staff, and a lot of times that just first, another acknowledgement for youth workers. You going out and buying those materials and supplies. We know that often youth workers will go out and spend their own money, even though they're not. They're certainly not paid gazillions of dollars. They'll go out and spend their own money. So providing those supplies is a way to say, we appreciate you, we value your work. And we know that you need the tools to do your job, and your tool may look like a sewing machine or a microscope, but regardless, you should have the tools that you need to do your job. And that is a way to celebrate and appreciate champions. It's also a way to ensure quality program, which you, again, put a lot of time into. Can you talk about that? As I think, we're talking about sustainability, but we want to sustain good stuff, right? There's no reason to keep around something that isn't working, something that's, beyond not helping, maybe even doing harm. So how do you maintain that program quality?
Well, and I think Nathan can definitely add to this. We are using an evidence-based, research-based model of improving a continuous quality improvement model through the Weichert Center for Youth Program Quality, in which we have certified external observers who go in and look at the program and how we can work with staff to take what they're doing and take it to the next level. And so that's important to us as we do this work. And we know it's the bedrock of the work. We also know that integrated into that is the focus on social and emotional skills and competencies. And that's really what's central and key to after school work and youth development work, is the development of those competencies. So those are all things that we take very seriously and work to develop and embed. Now, for our community, the pandemic has created major change, both in our supervisory staff and our frontline staff. And that is the kind of work that you have to continuously bring that work forward and work with staff. And that is not just through assessors, but then providing coaches, mentors, trainers in going right to the program. Not that they always have to come to us, that we go to them and work with their staff. So that's some of the ways that we're working on quality. But the other is, as you said, I mean, you can only do so much with quality if you don't have the tools to do it. Or if you don't have the time to train. I mean, we have a state system of licensing that doesn't really allow for anything but delivery of frontline services. Well, then where do you pay for supervision of staff? And where do you pay for training for staff and their time for training? So those are the things that we're looking to complement and supplement so we can ensure quality.
Well, that sounds like, again, a part of, Nathan, what you were working on there around that understanding of, paying for training and the value of bringing that youth worker with you to conference, and that instilling of skill, and then retaining that person in the work so that they don't take those skills and then, off you go to the next thing. It takes some retention effort. So I think that, in hearing both of you and thinking back on takeaways, I just would actually like to ask you, and this is an on-the-spot question. We didn't prep for this, so if you need a second, I'll brace you for it. But you've had a chance to listen to each other for a little bit, and I'm just wondering what your takeaways were from each other as you were listening on the call today. And I guess, Nathan, you're looking kind of prepared to answer that. So, like, as you were listening to Chris, what did you take away, or what thoughts came to mind as you were?
I jotted a couple notes down because I think this joint funding proposal is super interesting and curious. And I was literally in a meeting yesterday where people were talking about it. So I think that's something I'm curious to follow up. You talked about, and I love the way that you did it over summer, right? Maybe that's less ambitious than like all of our funding together, right? But maybe kind of chunking it out and saying, hey, we're all funding summer. Let's try something. So I think that was really cool. I loved how you phrased enlarge the scope of thinking of our boards. So I took that little nugget of way to talk about that. I appreciated you're talking about clarity of mission and kind of the enduring, right, requires clarity of mission, MOUs. And I'm also curious, you said something about first day of school funding. So that's something I was curious. I wrote down, I was curious to learn more about that. Maybe I got it wrong. You're looking like I got it wrong, but those are a couple takeaways. But it's been a privilege to share space with you, Chris and Jay and everyone else here.
Well, I certainly would love to know the secrets of your relationship with your school district and how you've gotten them to agree to do some of the things that they're doing. And something we haven't talked about, I also know you have a data system where you've had a lot of buy-in to that data system, including your district, which, I mean, if you talk to anybody in our community, they would be in awe of that, what you have done. So certainly being able to learn more about whatever the secret sauce is to how some of that has come about and how their legal department has agreed to some of this, because we have a terrible time even with transportation, and it sounds like you have transportation figured out. The other piece certainly is to learn more about how you are increasing compensation for frontline workers in that work. And it also reminded me of how the various, when I was working in a municipality versus now working in a private entity, and the differences of that. But we'll say that it really makes a difference when the city and the county are working very closely together. And this is one of the first times in years and years and years, the city and the county with the two elected leaders are working closely together, which makes a huge difference for our efforts in working together and bringing folks to the table. And then we're hopeful with the newest superintendent on board, and there's soon to be new deputy superintendent who I knew in a former role at the district before she left and was on the Regents, State Education Regents Board. So hopefully there will be more momentum. As I said, the biggest plus right now is the district has agreed to buy into the common application. And maybe at the end of the month, we will have some signed agreements. We will have a board approval for some funding from the district, both to our CDOs as well as to us as an intermediary to work more closely together. But I am not putting all my eggs in one basket till that actually happens.
Well, it's great to hear that, such mature partnerships with such a long list of accomplishments still are looking ahead, right? And I think it's that continual improvement and where do we go next? I do want to just do a quick promo for our May sustainability series. Just as an FYI, we'll be talking specifically about funders and building relationships with funders. A lot of times we think about sustainability and funding as an equivalency. Funding's important, but there is more to it than just the dollars. And that quality and that ability to demonstrate impact is one of the ways to draw funding in. What I loved about what Nathan was sharing was that idea of having youth workers help facilitate. You're paying youth workers to help facilitate that data collection. They're then recognizing the value, right? Because they're helping collect it, and it also becomes then your need statement data or your outcome data that you can use for grant applications or to position yourself for funding. So really activating all your stakeholders, I think is something I'm hearing from Nathan. And Chris, you highlighted it. So I do want to give Nathan a chance to talk about his work with the CitySpan data system. Not that CitySpan is the only one you can use, but it's the one that Nathan uses. And I'd love to hear about how you've built that partnership around that. And then we'll see if there's any other questions. If not, after Nathan shares this response, Chris, I want to ask if I could share screen and show that common application form. We apply through GRASA for funding. So if I could just share screen and scroll through and show people what it looks like, thank you. And then maybe you could comment on it as I'm doing so about just what happens after I submit that. Where does that go? I think you shared that before that briefly, but we want to be ready to talk us through that. So Nathan, could you share about CitySpan and how that came about and what that looks like?
Yeah. And I think we certainly are looking forward. We're also looking back at things that we need to pay attention to and things that the cycle of we're doing great and then we're not doing great and then we're doing great and then we're not doing great. And so I think our data work is one of those where we're actually like, okay, we need to pay some attention to it, given some change at our district and relationships, right? We're still good though, because it's super embedded into how they function. But I think we're just at a point in our district where it's like, okay, we need to reassess relationships and get back to the keeping on going. But our data work, so we're sharing personally identifiable data in real time of students, of about 10,000 students with over 100 different locations at 25 or 26 organizations. So relatively large scale for us. That did not happen overnight. And I think, I'll just do the short version of how we got it going. And I'll stop there. So, it took years of conversation, years of building relationships, years of selling and telling the story. And then it got to the point where we'd been talking about it for years, but nobody had written any words. And legal agreements need words. And you know what? The school district lawyer, there's not a chance in hell that they are going to spend their time writing words for an agreement like that. So I wrote some words. I copied other people's words, right? But it took somebody taking initiative and saying, okay, we've talked about it. Let's put the language. Let's write it down. And that was then the spark. That was the initiator. Obviously, the legal team looked at it and they were like, what the hell is this? And they made the changes they needed to. So I think it was a start, right? We needed to start. And that's where a lot of these conversations stopped. I think people don't know where to go. And I don't think you can rely on the lawyer of a district where their vested interest is to protect the legal interests of the district. They're not going to write an agreement for you. You've got to write it for them. You've got to have some language. And I don't think a lot of people do that. I think people think it's some expertise knowledge that, oh, I can't write a legal agreement. Well, I did. It's working 6 years or 5 years later, still working. We amended it. It's board approved. So yeah, that's how we started. Tons and tons and tons of other work before and after as well. But somebody's got to write words.
So on a day-to-day basis, that system is tracking which young person's attending which out-of-school time program, and it's connected with your school attendance data and your school. Yeah, so there's like, if a young person isn't at after-school program, you can look to see where they in school.
Yep.
And it has safety implications and interface between school and out-of-school time implications.
Yep. And now funders are aligning reports, not everybody, but now funders are aligning reports all around that. We've already have some, but we're having a convening in February to be like, everybody wants to reduce burden. We've demonstrated and everyone's using us. We did this also, 100 different locations are using the system. We did it voluntarily. There was no compliance, right? Which is another long story, right? Of how do you get 100 different organizations to do something that they don't have to do?
Really, right.
Yeah, willingly. But I think that's a value too, right? That this was not a compliance driven thing, that that it has to add value to their lives, right? It has to, and that's like the framework that we've always gone through. How are we adding value? How are we reducing workload? And if we're not doing that, then it's a system that nobody's going to use and is worthless. And so that's also, I think, a value set that we've really spent years and years working on.
Well, I think it's the, when I'm talking about partnership and collaboration, I say there's really three hinges, right? There's data, systems, and practices that comes out of a lot of PBIS work and MTSS work. But I think those are hinges that the door of partnership can swing on, and really thrilled with the expansive work you've done in that student data system. And I'm going to shift here and pivot and just share screen. This is, when we're talking about extensive and expansive, sometimes what's the toughest thing to do is to get something simple and accessible. And this is what Chris and team have managed to do with their Google Forms application. And it really is, Chris, let me let you talk more about it. But as a person that used it to try and help access some funding for the Lions Community Center out here, I was appreciative that you were doing a little bit of what Nathan said. You were not requiring of me something arduous and difficult when I'm trying to take care of young people. So after I fill this out, what happens next? Oh, I think you might be on mute, Chris. Chris, you might be on mute there. I'm not sure if you want to.
Sorry about that. For anyone who's in Monroe County, the application is due on the 24th, Tuesday. We'd extended the deadline because the district had joined in. But it is earlier this year. And the reason we did that, very truthfully, is because their boards are still approving. And we wanted to give programs time to plan and recruit staff. And last year we took it right up to May and June, and that's not enough time. And we heard everybody. And so we did move it earlier, and we know planning needs to be done earlier anyway. Usually most good summer programming, planning starts the fall after the program ends anyway. So it's very simple. Just how many days, how many hours, your age group, where are you located, and where you've got, describe your target population or how will the program. These are short answers. I mean, we limit, so you just need to be to the point. So there's short answers and there's some longer answers, but I think the longest answers are like 180 words, 150 words. So this is not about writing a book. It's being to the point. And as you can see, we're not asking for these outcomes that are, first of all, we find that people overpromised in outcomes. And so we're basically saying, what are your goals? What are your outcomes? Limit to 3 to 4. And what's your program going to do? I mean, these are with kids. It's very simple. It's short. It's to the point. Most people who are familiar with and doing their summer programming should be able to do this in 30 to 40 minutes. I mean, I had to fill out a national funder letter of interest form back in November, and they gave me a 200-word limit for this intense process. And I'm like, oh my God, how do I come up with 200 words to respond to certain sections of this? So it really does just force you to get to the point. In fact, what we did say, I don't noticed on that, is bulleting is okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think what I heard, and I guess kind of a closing thought here is that, and as much as I agree with Nathan, a lot of times coordination is working around the edges and sometimes there's just scarcity. But I do think that you found some valuable resource. You got some applicants that you would not have ordinarily heard from. You found some programs that you would have ordinarily maybe missed in a more complicated application because they wouldn't have had the bandwidth or capacity to complete it. So by making the application simple, you opened up the funding to people that are doing good work that might not really be able to write that logic model, take the time to do that, or take the time for a 20-page narrative, or articulate 5 years of funding history or whatever you may have to do. So I do think that there's a lesson in there for all of us, is that around our community somewhere, there's probably somebody doing something good you don't know about. And one thing to do is to think about how to find that person and find those groups and really make sure that they know that they have a seat at the table and that you've done the kind of systems work you need to do to make that space. And for those of you that are still on the call and are that little person feeling like, where's the seat for me at the big table? I have just complete confidence in the network for youth success, and I hope you will reach out to them. And I'd like to close the call out just with Allie, if you could one more time, just make sure that folks know how to get in touch with you and the other folks at the network, and just remind folks of the resource that we have in you all as an intermediary.
Well, thank you, Jay, and thank you so much, Nathan and Chris, for this really valuable workshop. And I will mention that we are going to be sharing the recording and slides with all of you after this, so you will have access to all of that, including our resource document. So I'm going to put it back into the chat with all of the information about the Network for Youth Success. You can find information on our professional development opportunities, our capacity building resources, our advocacy resources, and ways to get in touch with us, all on that one document. So I highly encourage you to check it out. I'll also mention, we did get some questions about finding specific resources for sustainability. Those folks that do sign up as members with the Network for Youth Success, in addition to many other benefits, do receive a monthly grants newsletter that outlines some grant opportunities relevant to after school and summer. So that is another place to come to find some of those resources. But we also hope that you will join the rest of the workshops in this series. We have the virtual sessions coming up, as well as the in-person ones at our annual conference.
Thank you, Allie. And yeah, February 15th, we're going to do Grant Writing 101. So share that with anybody that you would like to have attend in your organization or in your partnership that I'm sure all of you are working on building and expanding. So again, Nathan, thank you for coming out all the way from Wisconsin. Really appreciate it. Came all this way. And Chris, just for your ongoing advocacy and championship work, your champion work for out of school time work and for youth in general in our state and in our region. Really appreciate your contributions, and thank you everybody for your time on the call today. And we look forward to seeing you again. Please reach out to the network. They're there to help.